もっとですわ。だんだん良くなってきましたわよ、司令官様。今日は戦いもなくゆっくり休めますね。喜ばしいことです。
Hello everyone, this is Fjarlar. So I'm going to do something a little bit different than we usually do with these videos. I'm actually just going to be here by myself talking about this newest patch. And the reason for this is because we've fallen a little bit behind with our videos again. Sorry about that. But I do want to try to get this video out when it's actually still relevant, so people can decide whether or not they want to get Light of Genesis or Mariel, which are the new characters we got this patch, and a couple thoughts about the rest of the patch as well. I have talked about this patch in the past when it came out on the Chinese server alongside Trisket, who was my guest at the time, but hopefully with about 5 months of hindsight I can try to give you a little bit more information on whether or not you should try to get these characters. So let's start with Light of Genesis, who is probably more popularly known as Lolly Jess. So to sum it up very simply, Light of Genesis is a single target damage focused mage. She does have a couple AoE skills on her side. She has Dragon Blow and Meteor, which are both pretty good skills, especially Meteor given that there's a decent number of infantry in the meta these days. However, her talent gives her a damage boost when entering battle, which is why I say she is more a single target focused character. Using AoE spells in this game does not count as entering battle, so she does not get that damage boost on any of her AoE spells. She does however get a cooldown reduction based on the number of targets she hits with an AoE, up to 3 turns, so she can actually get both these AoEs down to like 2 cooldown if you hit enough targets. So even though she is a single target focused character, in a pinch she can actually still fit into an AoE comp pretty well, and that is especially true because of the utility she provides, which I'll talk about in a second. The second part of her talent is a stacking buff for herself. It increases her intelligence, and more notably it increases her attack range. So this is the part of her talent that is most affected by her star level. She can get 2 stacks of her talent at 3 stars, 3 stacks of her talent at 4 and 5 stars, and 4 stacks of her talent at 6 stars. For every 2 stacks of her talent she gets unit range +1, and this is why for Light of Genesis the 6th star is actually really important, because of course when you get a max of 4 stacks that means you can get unit range +2 instead of just +1. Each stack also gives her a bit of intelligence, so Lolly Jess's stat boosts from her talent is actually split down between damage and intelligence, which is actually really nice because that means you can build her in a way that you prefer. If you just want her to have really high intelligence, you can build her with Full Moon, give her equipment like Red Moon that increases her intelligence even further, or you can instead go the damage route, give her enchants like Breeze or even Meteor, and you can actually even equip her with the Pale Staff, which up until now was a decent staff but wasn't considered best in slot for anyone in particular, aside from maybe a PvE Ren using Ren Annihilation. This is where it's also good to bring up that there is actually a free Pale Staff from the newest Time Rift, so if you're lacking a solid weapon for your Lolly Jess, maybe consider jumping into Time Rift, and you can get yourself a shiny new Pale Staff. Now of course if you go the Pale Staff route, you are missing out on the extra range that would be offered by Scepter of Divinity, and you would also of course be locking her into a more single target focused build, which is okay because as mentioned, that's really her focus. So now let's talk about probably the most notable aspect of Light of Genesis, which is actually her assist kit. Her 2 main assist spells are Strengthen and Teleport. Now even just by themselves, these are 2 of the best assist skills you could ask for. Strengthen of course makes her self-sufficient. You don't have to bring a faction buff with her. You can just have her strengthen herself, and she'll be ready to dish out a lot of damage on her own. And of course, Teleport needs no introduction. It's just a huge tactical advantage, but what pushes Light of Genesis from being a good character to being an absolutely insane character is her 3-cost skill. More specifically, the passive portion of her 3-cost skill. So the passive on her 3-cost skill says that if she uses an assist skill and she ends her turn next to an allied unit, then she will act again with a cooldown of 2 turns. First I want to point out how crazy it is, just the fact that she gets a 2-turn cooldown on an act again, because a 2-turn cooldown on an act again is typically saved for 6-star units like Leonhardt or Iron Rod, but this is at a 2-turn cooldown right from the get-go. So even though if you're not at 6 stars you might not have the maximum amount of range for your Lolly just yet, she still has this 3 cost, which I think makes her useful at just about any star level. So first, the use of this passive with her Strengthen skill should be fairly obvious. She can use the act again to cast Strengthen on herself and immediately attack. What this means is that you don't actually need to really prep Strengthen. Sometimes if you're not sure when you are going to engage with your opponent, you don't want to cast Strengthen on yourself on the first turn so you don't get a dead turn where you don't have Strengthen. With this act again, you can just wait until you actually need Strengthen, cast it when necessary, and then immediately attack. But that of course pales in comparison to the utility you can get out of using this skill alongside teleport. So you can imagine a number of situations for Lowly Jess. First, she can teleport an ally, say maybe Juggler with B-Shock up, or an Emmerich next to the enemy tank, and then she will act again if she's next to someone, so she can immediately run in to snipe somebody if she needs to. You can also use it as a soft boost to Lowly Jess's movement. For example, if you run ahead of the unit you want to teleport by 2 spaces, and then teleport that unit next to Lowly Jess, she will act again and she can move again, getting closer to the enemy and attacking something you might not have been able to reach before. Because of the teleport, you can also have things like having Lowly Jess standing very, very far away from the action, keeping her safe from assassins or other dangerous units that might kill her, but she could just teleport herself in next to an ally, and then she can act again and attack something. So the flexibility of this 3C passive alongside her teleport and strengthen skills is just really crazy, and this variation in how Lowly Jess can be played is pretty much exactly why she became a really central meta unit. There are just so many different ways you can play her. As an added bonus, a couple of her single target skills also do some off healing, so she's even offering a little bit of healing on the side. It's not a large amount or anything, but it definitely increases her versatility. There's a reason why everybody runs Gift of Eternal Life on Old Landius, for example, so definitely a nice option if you feel like you need some extra healing. The final thing I want to note about Tensei Jess is her accessory choice. While it's perfectly fine to use standard intelligence accessories like Holy Ring, Vidar's Rose, or anything else you can think of, the most common choice on the Chinese server was actually Twilight Star. This is mostly a PvP thing, but what it allows you to do is to break last rites, and perhaps more importantly, lets you break sorceresses. Sorceresses have very, very high magic defense at 100% life, so without Twilight Star it is going to be very, very difficult for Tensei Jess to be killing any kind of mage. Now, I think it's worth remembering that if you go with Twilight Star, and you even go with Scepter of Divinity, you are doing a give and take. If you keep choosing equipment choices that lower your intelligence over a more conventional choice, that's going to lower your kill potential, and that's definitely something you need to keep in mind. Tensei Jess's killing ability can be pretty closely linked with the kind of equipment that you decide to give her. So it's important that you know the limits of your own T-Jess if you decide to use her, because if, for example, you teleport Juggler next to the enemy tank and you fail to kill whatever it is you are trying to attack, that can lead to a huge tactical disadvantage for you. Overall, I would say that Tensei Jessica is the prize pull of this banner. She's a great unit in PvP, but also a very good unit in PvE as well, although you do need young Jessica for one of her bonds, so do keep that in mind before you pull. So next we have Mariel. Mariel is a healer DPS hybrid character similar to other characters in this vein, like say Deedlit or Chris, but she does have a number of skills that make her stand out even amongst these type of units. First is that unlike other combat healers, she does not need to actually attack to heal other people. She actually comes with proper heal spells, both a single target and a mass heal variant. She's actually an attack-based healer, so her heals are modded off her attack, and she herself is a physical attacker when she does attack. Notably, her single target heal dispels 2 debuffs instead of just 1, like the standard heal does, but it only gives 3.5 times attack for healing, as opposed to the standard heal you get from most healer units, which is 5 times intelligence. Her mass heal variant has a 3-turn cooldown and heals for 2.5 times her attack, and dispels 1 debuff from each of the allies and adds 2 random immunity effects. The thing worth noting about this skill is that this skill transforms into an attack skill under certain circumstances. And why don't we just go ahead and talk about that requirement, because that is pretty much the central mechanic of Mariel's character. Mariel starts every map with a special buff. This buff increases her healing effects, it reduces the damage she takes, and it also reduces the damage she deals. This special buff goes away once she decides to attack somebody. What this essentially means is that Mariel starts the map in a healer mode of sorts, and as soon as you decide to attack with her, she will convert into a DPS focused character. So instead of being someone like Deedlit or Chris or Rachel, who sort of have a mixed role all the time, Mariel has a toggle built into her talent which decides whether she is more healing focused or damage focused. This makes her very much a PvP focused character. When you are early in the match and setting up, you can use Mariel as a support healer, and once you start engaging and you think you can use Mariel to fix someone off, you can turn her into a DPS and clean up. And Mariel as a DPS can be quite scary, mostly because of her 3-cost skill. First, her 3-cost skill has a passive that further emphasizes the difference between her healer mode and her DPS mode. When she is in healer mode, this passive will restore HP to 2 allies with the lowest HP, just improving her as a support healer. However, if she is in her DPS mode, this passive will instead grant her movement plus 3. So basically, once you decide to cancel out her healer mode and go full DPS mode with her, she will become very, very mobile. The active portion of this 3-cost skill is also very important to how she functions. On its own, it's already a very strong skill. It does 1.8 times damage and dispels 3 buffs from the target before attacking. It can also push back the target 3 blocks, but that's actually not the main way it is used. It's just a nice bonus when there's no longer a tank around, but usually this attack from the 3-cost skill will actually be hitting a tank, in which case it will actually get damage dealt plus 15%. Now, worth noting that most of the time, when you are using this skill, you are still in healer mode for Mariel, so you are getting minus 50% damage dealt. So the amount of damage Mariel will deal from this skill isn't necessarily super high when that is the case, but what makes this skill very dangerous is the buff that Mariel gains right after it. She gains a buff that says damage dealt plus 20%, her attacks ignore guard, and if she uses a skill to do damage, all skills will have cooldown minus 3. So when Mariel first removes her healer mode buff, she gets to act again. So here's how it would usually go down when you use the 3-cost skill with her talent. She attacks with the 3-cost skill on a guarded unit, so she hits the tank, she removes 3 buffs from the tank, will probably do a decent chunk of damage at least, even despite her talent reducing the amount of damage she's doing. At the same time, she herself will not take a ton of damage, because of course when she's still in healer mode she has a decent bit of damage reduction herself, and when she's done doing this first attack, her talent will kick in, she will lose her healer mode, and act again. And because of the passive portion of her 3-cost skill, she can now move plus 3 bases. Her next attack is going to ignore guard because of the buff from the 3C active portion. So, if Mariel is strong enough, and you think she's healthy enough, she can go pierce guard on one of your opponent's squishy units, and get yourself a kill. So this is what makes Mariel so good. She's just a very, very versatile unit. She can heal, she can fight, and she can even pierce guard in some limited capacity. Remember that I mentioned before that her mass heal variant actually turns into an attack skill after she loses her healer mode, and that attacking with a skill with the 3-cost skill buff active will give you cooldown minus 3 on all your skills. So Mariel uses her 3-cost and then turns into DPS mode. Her mass heal variant turns into an attack skill, and then she can use it to kill an enemy's squishy unit. Because she used the skill, she gets cooldown minus 3 on all of her skills. Her 3-cost skill has a 7-turn cooldown, so it'll still probably be on cooldown, unless you run a Clock Mariel, which I personally don't recommend. But it does mean that her Mass Heal variant's attack skill does in fact have its cooldown reset immediately and be ready. So that's why these 2 skills are pretty much the standard skills you bring on Mariel. You bring her 3-cost skill plus her Mass Heal variant. The 3rd skill was usually one of 2 choices. It was either her single heal variant, or her Prey skill, which is basically a Cold Blood style skill that also heals herself when she uses it. She does have a couple other support skills like Mass Attack and Attack Command, but because of the way her talent works and how you would usually play her, it's actually pretty hard to fit in the other skills in her set without severely crippling the way she's meant to be played. It should be noted that Mariel has an excellent selection of soldiers to choose from. She has Heavy Infantry, Highland Warriors, Amazon Champions, Zealots, so a nice variety of offensive troops, all with a 40% attack bonus from her soldier boost to make sure she can kill quite a few units. In fact, Mariel can sometimes even kill tanks, especially Juggler. And she also has Redeemers, which is definitely a really nice option to have when you want Mariel to be able to approach teams with assassins without any fear. Mariel can equip both mage armor, because she is a holy class, but she is also given the option to wear heavy armor. So even without Redeemers, you can still equip her with Aeolus armor and get those annoying RNG activations against enemy assassins. She does not, however, have any special exceptions for her weapon choices. So unlike a lot of the common choices for DPS who will be sticking to very powerful weapons like Ragnarok, Scarlet Reaper, or even simple choices like Seal Guardian, Mariel is stuck to using hammers, similar to Yusuke. However, unlike Yusuke, Mariel's skill set does not synergize well with the Mimer's Hammer. As a result, the best weapon she can use is probably going to be Mjolnir. And it actually goes quite nicely with her 3-cost, which, as mentioned before, dispels 3 buffs from the target before attacking. Dispelling 4 buffs from a tank, especially a tank like Juggler, may be enough to make him vulnerable to getting killed by Mariel. So this is really what makes Mariel so good. She's got great off-healing ability, she can be a solid DPS in general, she can pierce guard in a limited capacity, and in some situations she can even kill a tank for you. As I mentioned earlier, Mariel is mostly a PvP focused unit, so if you're not really into PvP, I would not recommend that you pull for her, and much like a ton of the Tensei characters, they have a lot of interdependence on each other. Mariel in particular needs you to pull both Light of Genesis and Rosalia. The former obviously is appearing on the same banner she is, but Rosalia's banner just passed and she's not going to be available for a long time yet. And the truth is, Mariel's factions don't make her particularly stand out for any of the PvE fights she would qualify for anyway. I mean, she's okay in many of them, but because of the way Mariel is built, that she has a healer mode that just goes away forever for the rest of the map if you attack, she is generally speaking just not that well built for the boss fights that constitute the majority of the endgame for PvE. Overall, a very scary character in PvP that is worth pulling for if you are interested in the Reincarnation faction or the Glory faction. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about the new 3-cost skills they released, starting with Shelfaniel. Shelfaniel's 3-cost skill is quite welcome, where an early pick Rosenseal can effectively protect a lot of teams from debuffs. This not only strips a lot of buffs, it also stuns demons, including Listel, and much like all of Shelfaniel's other AoEs, it has an opportunity to lower its cooldown by a significant amount. And if you find yourself in the right situation, Shelfaniel can just spam this skill over and over. This is effective against juggler first ban boxes. Even if your opponent picks Rosenseal into Shelfaniel, it still isn't necessarily going to protect them against her, because not only does this AoE skill do a lot of damage, but the amount of dispels this skill is dishing out might dispel a number of the crystal healing buff that the opponent has from Rosenseal. And of course, Mass Crystal Heal is on a relatively long cooldown, so if you time your use of this skill right alongside some other pure AoE damage units like say Ares, it's definitely a very dangerous skill to be playing against. Shelfaniel continues to have the same weaknesses that she has always had. Even though this is a heaven-sanctioned sized AoE, she's still not a very mobile unit, so getting her into range can sometimes be a pain. The other problem is, of course, Shelfaniel is one of the frailest units in the game. She can die quite easily to some very powerful AoEs like from Ares, even if she has Shrine Maidens. I actually have seen Shrine Maiden Shelfaniels die to an Ares AoE before. Now granted, this comes down to how good your enchants are, but usually for DPS like Shelfaniel, you'll be focused so hard on increasing her intelligence through enchants that you may have neglected her HP and defense enchants. So even though this 3-cost is a very, very strong 3-cost, it doesn't really solve a lot of Shelfaniel's weaknesses. It's not necessarily a problem, because after all, there's nothing wrong with a unit that has some weaknesses. You just have to try to shore up their weaknesses via your teammates, or through smart pick ban. This of course is also an excellent skill for PvE, especially maps with lots of demons. Overall, it's just a very strong 3-cost. Next we have Betty's 3-cost, Blade Flurry. So I admit I have probably given Betty more flack than she deserves in the past. I certainly don't think Betty is useless anymore. I think she does have a niche and she's quite good at that niche. The issue I have now with Betty is really, how do you fit her into a box? I think Betty would fit quite well in a slow, tanky box. She's quite good at punishing AoEs, and this 3-cost skill continues in that trend. First, this has a passive portion that says it can negate an AoE attack which would otherwise have been fatal, and this can actually activate 3 times. In my opinion, this particular section of the passive is completely useless. Betty takes reduced AoE damage anyway, so by the time Betty herself is dying to an AoE, I think the rest of your team is probably in a bit of trouble. Now certainly I can imagine situations where maybe Betty took a single target attack, and maybe you want her to survive an AoE afterwards because you can't afford to heal her, but I still find this section of the passive to be very disappointing. The more interesting aspect of this 3-cost is that anytime she activates her talent, and damages an opponent with their fixed damage, she will inflict damage dealt minus 50% on that enemy and any enemies within 3 spaces of that attacker. So this is especially useful against teams of AoEs that do not move separately from each other. So of course if you are fighting against an Ares for example, Ares usually just charges in by himself, so this part of the passive does not do as much. It does reduce the damage from Ares' second AoE, which is nice. But this is especially useful on teams like, say, a team with Bozol and Licorice or something. AoE teams that are frail and tend to stick around their tank and don't dive in by themselves. By inflicting this damage debuff, it does hurt your opponent's ability to follow up with multiple AoEs. And finally, this skill has an active portion that is essentially just a 2-ring sword dance. It does a 2-ring AoE attack around Betty, does 1 times attack of fixed damage, and also prevents them from being healed. So with this, Betty actually becomes sort of useful in a dark AoE box as well. She can be someone you use to maybe be a tank, and then use her as the first initiator on the opponent's team because she will heal block them, obviously assuming Rosenseal is not around. So overall I consider this a good, even great 3-cost skill. My problem is still, as I mentioned before, I'm not entirely sure how to fit Betty into a box properly. Maybe that's just because I'm not familiar with the use of Betty, but generally speaking, I find it hard to fit her into a box over other anti-AoE characters, like of course for example Juggler, or any of the powerful AoE healers like Liana or Rosenseal. Now you could argue, of course, that you could fit Betty into a box with all of those characters and have a very strong box versus AoE, but I feel that makes you vulnerable to a lot of different other kinds of boxes, and my issue with Betty is that she does not offer very much aside from that anti-AoE specialization. Sure, she can tank a hit in a pinch, she can now do a very powerful 2-ring sword dance move, which can of course be increased to 3 rings if you use a balance blade, but I feel like she just offers so little in terms of her overall kit. When you compare her to the other anti-AoE characters, the aforementioned juggler is still probably the most busted unit in the game on an individual basis, so maybe that's an unfair comparison. Even when I compare her to, say, maybe a soft AoE counter like, say, Wheeler, who has Mass Heal, Dispel, and Tactical Retreat, I feel like he is offering a lot more to a box than Betty typically would. Betty's just missing too many things. She doesn't have a solid single target attack skill. She doesn't hit in single target particularly hard with her soldiers. Her AoE Swords Dance skill from her 3 cost is nice, but nothing amazing. The most unique thing, of course, is that you can use Betty to punish AoE attackers and maybe cause them to kill themselves. Now, that is certainly very useful if you run into a full AoE rush player, but to me, that essentially pigeonholes Betty into being a very specific counter character. Like I said, I think Betty is better than I gave her credit for in the past. In the past I sort of made fun of her a lot. I do think she actually has her use, but I still personally believe that she could really use a buff or even an SP class in the future, so hopefully we'll see that come along sometime. And finally, we have Iris with the amazing Jean-Paul. There is not a ton to say about this skill other than that it is an enhanced dolly skill for Iris. One of Iris's weaknesses was that she was similar to, say, Tiaris, and did not have a very strong ability to dispel debuffs. So they have given Iris a new skill that lets her dispel quite a few debuffs, basically allowing her to keep up with a lot of the buffs that the debuff boxes have gotten. Even though obviously Rosensteel exists now, the debuff boxes will first ban her. So enhancing the dispelling ability of some of these older healers is certainly welcome. Even with this pretty good 3 cost, I think Iris is still going to be mostly confined to rush boxes, or possibly low budget or low spender boxes, who do not have a lot of healers built yet, because of course Iris is a free healer, and she's a really good one. The problem of course is that she is a collab character, so she is only available to people who were around during the Sakura Wars collab. Now, during this month on the Chinese server they did get a rerun of Sakura Wars, but at least for the moment it doesn't look like Global is going to be getting that just yet. So unfortunately, if you are a newer player and you are looking for a solid healer to get for free, you may have to wait a little bit longer before you can get Iris. Otherwise, for all you rush players that were lamenting that perhaps Iris's healing ability was a little bit lacking, here is a nice buff to Iris for all of you. So now let's look at the 2 new pieces of exclusive equipment they added, starting with Ilucia's Midsummer Memory. This is a very good hammer. It essentially says that if you try to single target Ilucia, she will always be in water, so unlike Juggler, it's actually very difficult to dispel her water and attack her. It also gives Ilucia the ability to guard magic. Anytime she is in water, she will have a 1-ring guard around her for both physical and magical attacks. So this patches up probably one of the biggest complaints I've always had about Ilucia, which is that she cannot guard magic. Now it is true that just like Juggler, Ilucia can be very weak to magic, but these days she not only has the pirate soldiers to help shore up that weakness somewhat, but also generally speaking you probably want your tank to be taking the hit instead of some frail DPS anyway. Really, there's only one loophole in this hammer anymore, which is the fact that if you dispel water off of Ilucia, she will no longer have a magic guard, and this piece of equipment only gives the water back to her when she is attacked and enters battle. So if she has Triton up still, and she can guard physical, sure, she'll come in and guard someone against physical and put up her water again. But against magic, if you somehow manage to dispel her water, you can freely attack her team with magic again, because she doesn't just magically get water back whenever you attack one of her teammates, she has to guard. And that is pretty much the only weakness I can spot here in what is otherwise a very good exclusive. So next we have Maiya's Dustbuster. I guess up until now Maiya was just running around cleaning stuff without a broom. She was using her hands or something. So first, this weapon turns Maiya into a flying unit, or at least a flying type movement. This of course has its advantages, but it also means she's going to get blocked by Olandius tiles, so that is sort of a downside. But because she also now has the ability to remove enemy terrain tiles, it's not as big a deal, because Maiya can just remove those tiles anyway. Just respond with your own AoEs from Maiya and remove those pesky tiles. And this weapon also greatly increases the cleansing ability of Maiya. Every time she ends her turn, she will dispel 1 debuff from all her allies within 2 blocks. I mean, when you compare this to the exclusives given to, say, Chris, it's honestly pretty crazy how much stuff they gave Maiya. So overall, I would say Maiya herself has not actually changed that much. but the meta has changed in a way to make Maiya more useful. Maiya has always been able to remove buffs from enemy units, and right now it's probably more relevant than ever that she can do that. Alright, another interesting thing to talk about here is Angelica's new class, which is Bishop. The class itself is really not that interesting. Her original mage class still has better stats, as you might expect. That's usually the case with mage versus holy classes. But Angelica has gotten 2 new skills, which have greatly increased her versatility and her viability as a support character, especially in a time box. So first you have Mass Heal, which, it's always useful. For a character like Angelica, who has no damage or intelligence boost in her talent, it's always more useful for her to have a support skill like Mass Heal than the few AoE spells they gave her. However, by far the more interesting skill she has received is this new 1-cost skill called Reconfiguration. Not only is this a single target full heal and dispel all debuff skill, which by itself is already pretty nice, but it also uniquely converts the class of the target hero into either infantry, lancer, or cavalry of your choice. Now I do want to note here that the translation for this skill in the global version is kind of weird. It says right here that hero soldiers become infantry, hero soldiers become lancers, hero soldiers become cavalry. This is actually a very, very poor direct translation of what the Chinese text said. The Chinese text just says that the hero's soldier type becomes infantry, lancer, or cavalry. So contrary to what the skill here might say, it actually only affects the hero and not the soldiers. So they got it kind of the other way around because of the way they translated it. And in my opinion, it's definitely a lot more useful for the heroes type class to be changed rather than the soldiers. Now, this class type conversion only lasts for 1 turn. So if you use it with someone like, say, Claret, only your first attack is going to be that converted class, but sometimes that's enough for you to bust a tank of your choice. If you're fighting a Cav Landius and you change Claret into a Lancer, I don't think the second class not being Lancer type anymore is really going to matter that much, because I seriously doubt that first attack is not going to kill Landius's first life. So while I wouldn't say this is a broken skill in any way, it is definitely a very, very interesting one, and I think this is really the type of skill that Angelica needed to become more relevant. She's just a very interesting support unit. I don't think you're going to see Angelica very often in boxes still. She's just still too underpowered in comparison to a lot of supported characters. But for a heavy time character user, or perhaps even just someone who wants to go with a gimmick strategy, I think Angelica is definitely a character worth examining. I would actually put her on the same level as units like, say, Varna, in terms of SR characters that have interesting niches that you can try to work a strategy around. I'll close this off by talking a little bit about the newest content they added for this patch. Of course, they have the new Wikigrisser 5 Time Rift. As I mentioned earlier, the most notable new drop from the secret treasures in this Time Rift is the Pale Staff, which coincides with the Light of Genesis character pretty well. It's a very solid weapon for her. But aside from that, there's really nothing particularly impressive from the Wikigrisser 5 Time Rift, although of course it does give a decent amount of tickets and crystals for you to pull if you are out of those. And the Secret Realm event we were promised this month is actually the Valentine's event. Now, this of course is appropriate. We are in February, but it does make me wonder if we will ever see the Sakura Wars rerun. It's possible they'll just delay it, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. So I know this is a lot shorter than we usually have shows like these, and I know I'm probably a little bit more boring just by myself without Frontier to bounce off of, but I guess take this as a bit of an experiment to see how it goes when I'm just by myself, and hopefully this video was useful nonetheless. Our next video is of course going to be about the Lord of Crimzo and Sissy White, so I hope you guys look forward to that. And of course I'll be joined by Frontier when that happens. See you guys next time.